Hi, I'm Kim from Chatterbox Quilts. In today's video, I'm sharing a live stream from the Quilter's Way. The Quilter's Way is an online membership that I host, and we've been running for, at least 7 years now. If you're interested in learning more about that membership, please look in the description below. We offer a 14-day free trial to check us out. Now, in today's video, and it's a bit of a longer video, I'm talking about modern quilting, okay? I'm more of a traditional quilter myself, but I am interested in the modern quilting movement. And in this video, I share insights into what modern quilting is, I get into improv quilting, and I'm going through various books and picking out information from them to share with you that explains more about what modern quilting is, what are the different elements in that particular type of quilting. So I hope you enjoy learning about modern quilting. And make sure everybody's here before we start talking about modern quilts and modern quilting and what that all involves. And I've got lots and lots and lots of books to share with you with information in them. So I think that will be interesting today, and you may learn a few things about modern quilts that you didn't know, if you know anything about modern quilts at all, because there's lots of different ideas on what modern quilts are, and I'm going to share some of those with you today and the different looks of some of them as well. Modern quilts. Okay, so we were talking about this during Energize, and I know Bridget was mentioning that it would be interesting to take a bit of a dive into modern quilts and what are modern quilts, what distinguishes them, how can you, as a traditional quilter, I look as a traditional quilter, how can you, if you want to, morph into or dip your toe into modern quilts, right? Well, I think the first thing I think most of us think of when we think of modern quilts is using solid, bright fabrics, right? And that's what you do see a lot of, no doubt about it. But you should be able to take, there's more to it than that. That's one of the tenets, but there's more to it than that. You should be able to take the knowledge of what a modern quilt consists of. That's an awkward sentence, isn't it? You should be able to take the elements that comprise a modern quilt and use, whatever fabric you have, to some degree. Oh, and I left one book upstairs. I have a book out of the library right now that's Anna Maria Perry, used to be Horner, and she has a book called Blueprint Quilting out, and she uses prints in her quilts. And from a distance, you see the designs there because she's a master of value. But if you look, when you get closer to them, and some people will say, oh, that's just a little much because there are all these different prints put together. But because they have the changes in value, you see the designs. And of course, most quilts are meant to be viewed in their whole from, at least 3 feet back, right? So interesting looking at hers, but a lot of modern quilters, of course, use solid fabrics, but you don't have to, right? But you do need to make sure that there's a contrast, as in any quilt, really, right? That still holds true. Contrast in the fabrics so that you can see the design, right? So if you're using all, kind of medium darkness in your fabrics, as we tend to have a lot of those in our stash, then you're not often going to see the actual block design, right? Because everything will just kind of blur together. So, and sometimes you want that, but most of the time we don't, right? So I pulled a bunch of my books here. I've got a huge stack of them here. I'm not sure how many I'll get through, but I wanted to pull out some and go over some information in them. And the first one I'm going to share with you is from Carol Lyle Shaw, who unfortunately passed away last year. But she has this book, Madly Modern Quilts, and there's another one as well I'm going to share with you. But what she's got in the front of this I thought was really helpful is she talks about what is a modern quilt, okay, and different myths about modern quilts, right? So the myths is interesting as well, okay? So when she talks about myths, modern quilters must use gray background fabric. And that is something that you used to see quite a bit in the modern quilts. Like kind of, a few years ago, you would see a lot of gray, right? But that's not necessarily true. It's not true. It says at least 50% or more of a modern quilt must be negative space. And when I was at QuiltCon, and one of the lectures I was in, maybe Tara Fawn, I can't remember who it was talking about negative space, because I think most of us, when they talk about negative space, this is usually considered as a huge swath, large, amount of fabric that is sort of your background, really, but it's like this huge area with nothing in it, right? No blocks or anything, right? And it's a great place to highlight your quilting, right? But negative space isn't necessarily just it is a background, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that much showing of a background. It can just be kind of your background fabric. It might show a little more than, say, your blocks or applique elements, but it does not necessarily have to be this huge, huge amount of all one fabric. So if you look up here, for example, I would say, this would be the negative space, right? There's your little block, and that's all your negative space. But it could be just, just a little bit on either side. Also, it says here, myth number 3 is that modern quilters do not hand piece, hand quilt, or hand applique. And I know I've mentioned to you before that I saw, hand quilting on a lot of the quilts in QuiltCon and additional hand embroidery details. Myth number 4, modern quilters never ever use batik in their quilts. Modern quilters only use solids. And of course, that's not true either. They use all different kinds of fabrics. And even, I'm seeing more and more recycled fabric used in quilts, especially with modern quilters. The sustainability movement is becoming larger all the time. Myth number 5, modern quilters don't bother to learn how to precision piece or match seams. Okay, so I think, again, initially when modern quilts became a thing or were becoming a thing, I think a lot of people thought that modern quilts meant that you did not have to have good technique, that you didn't have good seams, that things weren't matching where they should have, that type of thing. That's not true, although at QuiltCon it is true that they tend to look at design more than technique. So that was interesting. But I think over the years, you've seen that modern quilters certainly have the same amount of skill as far as, 1/4-inch seams and making sure their points match and that type of thing. Myth number 6, modern quilters don't make whole cloth quilts. Okay, so some of these, again, this is not necessarily true because they may be using their hand piecing, their embellishments, hand embroidery embellishments to create the design in the quilt. And sometimes you will see them having, a block, and then you'll have the quilting is actually creating, say, a shadow block, that type of thing. So she says here, one of the worst myths sounds something like this. Modern quilters don't care about quality workmanship at all. So yeah, I think that was a big one in the beginning that you were maybe seeing, might have been true, but now I think that's changed quite a bit. So those are some of the myths, and I'm sure some of those will probably, are things that you've thought or heard people say in talking about modern quilts. But she also has information about what is a modern quilt. So a modern quilt has, she says here, you won't see all of these elements in a modern quilt, but the modern quilter usually has 1 or 2 or more of these elements in the quilt. So simplicity and minimalism. All right, now they actually will talk about maximalism sometimes as well, but usually, they look often much simpler than a traditional pieced quilt that's, block, 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 block sort of thing. So more simple. Modern traditionalism, reinterpretations of the past, using traditional blocks in a new way. One of the books I have that I want to share with you today talks about doing that, exploding blocks, changing scale, that type of thing. Some quilters, Anna Marie I'll say Horner again, Anna Maria Perry, she actually has, she will tend to use certain blocks, traditional blocks. I'm trying to think log cabin, Dresden plate. I'm trying to think what else she uses. Those are the ones that come to mind right away, but she uses them in a different way than you would in a traditional quilt. Infinite edge, so no binding, no borders, or making the binding and borders from the background fabric. Okay, so you don't have that stop with the binding, it just continues off. So you often see modern quilts without a border. That is true. I saw a lot of that. Asymmetry and alternate grid layouts. Again, I'm going to talk about alternate grid layouts in another book here, but asymmetry, yes, you'll see, that it's not, again, just block, 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 block sort of thing where it looks very symmetrical. A lot of times you will see, something going on one side and not as much on the other, asymmetrical. Use of negative space, incorporating a background fabric that covers a noticeable percentage of the quilt top. Okay, so again, that is, you'll see that in some quilts, but not all of them. And I think that's changing a little bit actually too. I didn't see quite as much of that as I would have in the past, I don't think. Exaggerated or varied scale. Experimenting with block scale or size, such as making a quilt top that is just one large block floating in a lot of neutral space, or making the same block in very different sizes in the quilt. So I mentioned that before as well. So it's kind of a bit of a repeat on the modern traditionalism, I think. Bold modern graphics in print fabric. So yes, you might see what you call Modern fabrics used in modern quilts as far as the printing. So again, Ruby Star, Tula Pink, those are kind of what I consider modern fabrics. Not Civil War prints, but it's not to say you can't use them. Okay, modern color palettes. And you'll see, one of the things that struck me at QuiltCon was putting together colors, although most of them I think use the color wheel a lot, but they also play with it. So I saw a lot of different ones where there were colors put together that I normally wouldn't put together, like a peachy color and a navy, for example, with a splash of bright green, which sounds horrendous, but it worked really well. It was very effective. So totally different color palette than a traditional quilt. Also improvisation, experimenting and playing with block design, quilt layout, fabric choices, and all other aspects of the quilt design. Improvisation means seeing what emerges when you let go of pre-planning and measuring, right? So those are the things that she considers modern quilt, to be a modern quilt. And while Carol has passed away, you can still go to her website. She does have a website. I'll put that in later in the discussion area that you can get more information. She has a lot of great information in her blog as well. And you can see, a gallery of her quilts too, of course. So there's one of her books. So that's again, sorry, Madly Modern Quilts. All right. Now, the second one she had, and Patriotic Modern Quilts. Now, this is great for you people in the States because it's all US, themed colors, right? But I bought this because just because she's using those colors doesn't mean you can't put them in any other color you want, right? And she's got some really fun designs in here too. And I wanted to talk just a bit about some of these things I mentioned. So for example, you've got a few elements going on in this one. This is a disappearing four patch with stars. Okay, so which way is the best for you to see that? I guess you can sort of see that. So you can see the stars in there, right? And you've got this four patch. So that's a disappearing four patch where you take the four patch, you make it, you cut it up, and you put it back together again. So right away, that gives you a totally different look than your traditional quilt block, right? When you cut it up. But she's not putting them all next to each other either. You can see that negative space she's got going in there. She's got these bold, solid fabrics, bold graphics, and the bright yellow. So you've got that color going there. You've got no borders there. I don't know that she's faced this quilt. I'm guessing because if she bound it, you would see, different, like it's all just the colors are running to the edge. So I'm assuming it's faced. I haven't really checked that far into it. But yeah, so she's got all these different things going on. That would say it's modern. I gotta laugh because we do have a gray background here. It looks white maybe to you, but it is a gray background. Doesn't have to be though, okay? Doesn't have to be. But that's an example of how she's taking traditional blocks and changing them up and giving them a modern look. I'm trying to find another one. Here's another one. Similar, that's the same one. That's the front of the section. Okay, I gotta go the other way. Here's another one. Okay, here's a blue background. Okay, not the gray. Just the blue. Squares with improv. All right. So you can see you've got, like strips here. You've got like a four patch here. You got one by itself. So just throwing them in. They're all squares or rectangles. So they're not, curvy shapes or anything like that. But again, you've got the negative space. This one I would say is bound with the blue, right? But still, you don't have that break. You've got that infinite edge she talked about as well. So there's some fun different designs in here. Here's really one, Patriotic X blocks, really looking improv, right, with the blocks. They're all different. Different sizes of the blocks. You got the small blocks together here, the bigger blocks here, different fabrics in them. You've got kind of clusters going on here, this asymmetry, sorry. She's got, it's not a border, but it's inset there. That's kind of interesting that she's done that. And then again, lots of negative space, no border around the outside. So you can see how she's using these different elements that she believes make up modern quilts. And I think it's really good definition of it. And she'll tell you over here what she's using, actually. I guess I could have looked there. How did I do? Playing with scale. Okay, that's what she'll call the bigger and smaller ones. Improvisation, yep. Use of negative space, asymmetry, and alternate grid layouts. So yes. So lots of fun, fun designs. Change up the colors, put in whatever colors you want. And the Patriotic Modern Quilts is an interesting book as well. I like her design. She's an excellent teacher too, actually. Then I have this one, which I've done book reviews on some of these. I've done a book review on this one for sure. This is the Quilter's Negative Space Handbook by Sylvia Schaefer. And this one's really interesting. So if you can understand the thinking that goes into creating some of these quilts that is also helpful in using that information to create your own modern designs. And this particular one, she talks about how you would have like a traditional quilt and how you can change that to make it, look modern. So she talks about, for example, you've got, a traditional looking sampler quilt here. And then by changing color or removing elements. So you can see if you do these, either you take them all out or change the colors on them to, maybe blend, what am I the word I'm looking for? I'm trying to think the word you call those quilts when they have the colors all the same. I mean, it's monochromatic, but there's another name. But anyway, it'll come to me. But you can take that out. So again, you've got asymmetry here as well, right? So she's changing that up a little bit here. Here you throw into that, or I should say remove the border situation there, remove that element, and that takes it that one step further. And she has lots of examples in this book about how she's doing things. Here you can see she's removed those blocks entirely and just has it coming along with a few of them like that. And when you think about things like that, it's going to be probably quicker to make this quilt than this one with all those blocks, right? So that helps a little bit too, right? And you can see more of what she's doing here, varying the block sizes. Here, you can see she's got, different big blocks and then smaller ones, removing some of them. Here she's taken out the border, so different things. And you can kind of, you could take the same blocks like she's done here and make small quilts maybe if you wanted to work through this to try different things and play with some of these ideas and make different ones and see how they look and what else you might want to change in them. Here's an example here where you've got these big blocks or inverting them, right? So you've got the lighter colors here, the darker ones there, and also that difference in scale here. So that makes quite a big difference. But she goes through in each part here, she will go through and talk about what she's doing. Again, here's another example here where you've got, all this negative space here with what I would call ghost quilting here, where you're mimicking the blocks. And then, you've got the asymmetry going on here. The other thing I want to point out in this book is, she is using, while there's solids here, she's using prints in here as well. So that's kind of nice to see. It's hard to find books that have prints being used, in the fabrics a lot of times I find, right? Just trying to see if she's got, so this is the best example here, I guess. There's another one she calls disintegration, or excuse me, they'll take these blocks and, when people say they blow them up. So you're starting with these, but you see how they're, it looks like they're being blown up, right? They're being torn apart, if you will, and only bits and pieces of them are being put in, or changing the scale of the fabric in the background, the gradient of the fabric in the background here, where she's going lighter to darker, but these all read pretty much the same as far as color, right? And then you have these pops of bits of the block. Here's another example here where you can see the block here, and then she's going to start moving it over here. You got asymmetry and a lot of that negative space, and then you start pulling the elements out. Here she's added a second block in a smaller size. So that's another thing that you can do with the modern quilts. So kind of interesting. I like this book, Quilter's Negative Space Handbook, because she goes through them step by step and explains what you may have heard people talking about with modern quilts, what they're doing, but she explains how you can take your traditional block and do that. Then I got some books on improv. This one here, Quilt Improv by Lucy Summers, Incredible Modern Quilts from Everyday Inspirations. Do you get inspired by things you see every day? I don't. Colors, maybe. I don't know. I don't know where the inspiration comes from. Just my head, I think. This one here, she has different blocks in it. So you see a lot of different things. She talks about strips. Okay, you got the strip piecing block. She talks about curved, circles and how to use those. The insets that you can do. Log cabin. A lot of people work with log cabin. So they work with a lot of traditional blocks, the curves, drunkard's path, if you will. Log cabin, sometimes a Dresden plate. You'll see those blocks, those traditional blocks being used in different ways in modern quilts. This one here, she's pulled in a lot of the different elements. Now she's using mostly solids. I mean, you have some of these fabrics here that have a little bit more color in them, but there's not a huge amount of prints going on in here. But you can see again how she's changing up things. If you look at the backgrounds in here, right? there's lots of negative space. It's not that huge swath of negative space, but there are in the background enough areas where you could do some different quilting if you want to. A lot of times you're going to see these either wavy lines or straight lines, a lot of straight lines still in modern quilts that I see. Again, she doesn't have a border around the outside. We've got differences in scale here. So you see these repeated in a lot of these books. So, you know, which is a good thing, I guess, because then, you know, you can go, okay, so I can do that too, right? Here again, this is kind of fun. She's got these different strips going on, strips here too. These look, I would say, they're a little more traditional looking than some of the improv quilts I've seen. However, they are still different than a, you know, traditional quilt. And even though these are like strip pieced together, they almost read as negative space in that there isn't you know, a block design like there is here in the quilt. Here she's got a little, looks like she's got a little thin border there, but it is the background fabric that's been used in those strips, so it kind of bleeds out to the edge, if you will. And here's another one. I don't know if I think it's probably the best one here. No curves in this one here, but lots of improv little blocks through here, right? Again, all the different colors, but a lot of negative space there, differences in scale. This is interesting because she's actually put a border on that, but all different fabrics plucked from the center blocks, I assume. I think so. So, you know, in this book, she's mostly working with solid or kind of solidish fabrics, I would say. But not to say you couldn't do this with patterned fabrics as well, right? So that's kind of interesting too, quilt improv. So I'm going to start with something that's kind of improv, but close to traditional, if we will, because we're going to move out of that in a while here in another book. Modern Improv Quilting, Be the Boss of Your Design by Laura Venema, a well-known modern quilter. And she goes through different improv techniques. So she starts off, I should say, with a classic improv. And so she goes through here and we have different blocks in this book. What she does is she has different blocks. Okay, so she's doing square and square. There's your stripes, you know, curved, half circle, what she calls a shift block because it's not, you know, like this. It's more of one fabric than another. PD, I'm not sure what PD stands for exactly. ABCBA, that's ABCBA, right? So she's got in triangles. So she's using these in different ways. And as she goes through, she uses different techniques. So she gives you blocks, okay, to use. She tells you how to cut up your fabrics to make these blocks. I'm trying to get the blocks. Here we go. So we have some rectangular blocks, what she calls half C blocks, square blocks, but they're all different, right? And then you're going to pull those together into a quilt. So she's kind of, you know, sort of it's a technique book in that you're learning how to make different blocks and you can then pull them into a quilt, which she'll show you quilts how to do them. But you could also take those in and make your own. This one here, she says all the shapes. So you've got your curves. She's got, there's your curves here, two-tone blocks, stripes. You can see all the different ones she's got in there, but she's pulling them all together into one quilt. And again, in this particular book, she's using the solids. I like to see them when they use pattern because I think that can be a little more challenging, right? And then she has, you know, you can see as you go, you're building up more and more complicated blocks to put into your quilt, but all improvisationally done. Although they look pretty, you know, you know, square and, you know, traditional, I would say. They don't look, you know, your squares, some of them aren't kind of not perfectish looking, right? They look fairly similar to what we see in most traditional blocks if we were making that. Then I've got this one, Inspiring Improv. I know I have a book review on this one for sure from Nicholas Ball, who's a British quilter. And he talks about different techniques he uses. He's an improv quilter. So we've got the curves. And it's always interesting to see how people make these or what tips they may give you for how they do these as well, because you'll see these in different books, right? But it's always interesting to see how different people talk about them and their tips. Insert. So he goes through all these different things. Rings. Okay, so this is something you don't always see, is these rings, which are really, or like flowers, you might call them. Very effective. And I'm trying to see, I should have marked it here, but let's go to the back here. Here's some of his quilts. So very much improv. So again, here with the triangles, for example, different scales. You can see the triangles are all kind of wonky looking, right? Different backgrounds in there, but they all kind of blend, if you will. I know he's got this one in here. I'm just trying to find it. There's some of your inserts there. So these look very much improv to me, right? Lots of things going on that we've talked about before, different scales. Another one, there's your log cabins there, right? I don't know if I got this one here. Okay, let's see. There we go. This one looks like shattered glass to me. I can see a better picture of it. There we go. Or stained glass, stained glass, shattered glass, whatever you want to call it. But again, you look at this and you're going to think improv. This is kind of fun though, because you can see here he's got the little mermaid in there. You could fussy cut the fabrics to put in there, which is also kind of a fun thing to do. I don't know that this is, I'm looking for one that this one here that he talks about in the background, it's on the front cover, right? And he actually made this and then cut it in half. It's like a tree, the center of a tree, but nothing screams modern more than that kind of an edge, I think, in a quilt, right? I mean, you don't see those in a mod or a regular quilt. So there's the part of it, right? In a traditional quilt, I'm trying to say. But even here, because it's closer up and stuff, you can see how wonky all the strips are as well, right? So they're not cut perfectly straight. The strips are wonky. The design is asymmetrical. The edges are asymmetrical. So this is an interesting book, actually. I like he's a bit of a different take on the improv quilting than what we typically see. This book's been out for a while, Victoria Finley Wolfe, 15 Minutes of Play, Improvisational Quilt. So this one, she's definitely using patterned fabric to do her quilts. And, you will see some of these quilts and you're going to go, I love it, or oh my God, it's too overwhelming. Okay, so on the front. So, people will have a visceral reaction to a lot of these quilts. I think maybe more of a reaction to modern quilts than you would to a traditional one. But you can see here, I would call this like crumb fabric basically put in there. But you got the negative space going on. You have, well, two different blocks really, although they are the same size. I mean, the stars are all the same size, that type of thing. But certainly throwing all those fabrics in there, makes it look very different than the traditional quilt. But she goes through doing different techniques to create her block. So here, for example, so this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the crumb fabric, right? Where she's putting it together. So she shows you how she puts it together and then she's trimming up. So you notice here, she's trimming that up to a square. Okay, that's not, it's not a wonky shape or anything like that. So even though she's doing this improv, you can still see she's working with the bones of a traditional quilt for sure. So this, like I said, this book is a few years old. I think things have changed a bit. This isn't one of her projects, but somebody else's. But you do see some of the smaller blocks here. While this is all pieced, the background, that would be your negative space. You can also see the different sizes in the blocks there. So you do see some of those elements of modern quilts, but we're using a lot of, regular traditional quilt fabric, which is good, right? Because if you want to get into modern quilts, I would hope that you could step into it using your current fabric stash and that you don't go out and buy a whole bunch of solids just to start, right? So you can learn some of the techniques. And then if you wanted to, add to your stash, you certainly could. But she's talking about, doing some of this, getting into the feel of improvisational quilting, because for a lot of quilters, that's very difficult, right? Not using, a ruler, maybe even to cut, not, cutting curved lines or just organic shapes. And a lot of people really, really struggle with that. And they don't have any rules either. One of the things at the Modern Quilt Guild was the fact that you didn't have a pattern. Like there was some quilts that were made using a pattern, but the majority of them were all original quilts. So a lot of them will work with a design wall as well. It's another thing. They create on the fly, if you will. They'll put up blocks, they'll put up fabrics, and then let them sit for a bit, take a look at them. If they don't like them, they switch them out. I mean, I know you can do this with traditional quilts, but it's a lot of the working and creating process for modern quilts, I think, is done that way. Okay, so there's that one. And then we start getting in, we get into this, and there's a couple here. This is one of them. Another one where you're going to go, oh my God, I love it, or oh my God, oh my God. The Improv Handbook for Modern Quilters, a guide to creating, quilting, and living courageously, from Sherry Lynn Wood. This one, she has different people creating quilts using a certain, what she calls a score, it's like a musical score. And she gives you, it's like a challenge, or she'll give you guidelines and then see what people come up with, right? But she has a few things here that she thinks are important when you're talking about improv quilts. What is improv? Working without a plan, thinking on your feet, figuring out as you go. So there's that design wall element, as I was mentioning, making do with what you have. I like that one. Problem solving. So, if it isn't working, I don't like it, what's wrong, how to fix it, make it, more appealing to me. Taking risks, breaking the rules. Yes. Decision making. Anything goes. Accepting what is. Creating spontaneously. Freedom and responsibility. Freedom from perfection. And setting your own limits. So there are no quilt police in modern quilting, that's for sure. Okay, so that's what I'm getting from that, right? But she goes into more, like, she talks about reasons to go ruler free. I won't go through all of them and stuff, but I think a lot of modern quilters feel that if you are using those with the ruler and stuff, you are, by the very nature of what you're doing, regimented to a straight line, right? And that can, really take you away from that spontaneous creating, that, thinking on the fly and just thinking, this looks good, I like it, or, I want an edge that goes like this, or I want a wavy line or whatever, right? If you're using a ruler, that limits you and limits your thinking to some degree too. So she has these different scores. So here's an example of one. This one is talking about layered curves, is what they're using here. But she goes, improv is experimenting and getting lost. It's an interesting book, actually, and I like how they have the what she calls a synopsis. So this particular case, these guidelines of what you're doing here. So for example, she says the first thing you need to do here is learn the simple technique for curve units, choose your fabrics, consider your options and cut base units. And then round 1 is to stack and cut one curve. Round 2 is to stack and cut a second curve. And the round 3 is to stack and cut multiple curves and then combine the units into a composition. So she walks you through all this, and you can see how things develop, right? So you're getting your fabrics here, you're starting to cut them, you're cutting them again, right? And you're cutting them again. And then you have to start putting them together. So how are you going to put these together? What do you like? Do you like the first one? Very traditional. Look at the difference between the first and the third one, right? So it's interesting. And then you can go and see, she has a gallery at the back of different people who have made these. Here's Amy Friends, for example, what she's made. I think this has the one in this particular one. Okay. Most of the other ones have a lot more. I like this one, actually. I think this is fun. But she goes through, and there's several different synopsis, if you will, that she's doing different things in here. This one's all working with curves. But, these are really, for me, really out there, really improv, really different. But it's also interesting in this particular one here, all the different ones, how different they all look, starting with the same kind of guidelines, if you will. Lots of negative space in that one, right? And big quilting designs too. Interesting. So yeah, this one is really, quite different. And the quilts that come out of this are quite, like, I mean, this one here for me is like just too much. Some people would love it. Great way to use up your scraps for sure. But it's experimenting, it's having fun. It's seeing what you can do and what it can turn into. And, the thing is, if you make all these different blocks and that, there's a million different ways to put them together. And you may find that you don't use some of the blocks. That's another thing. They may make some blocks and not even use them, or add other ones in. So maybe it needs more negative space. Maybe it needs a totally different kind of block. Continuing with the improv situation, we have Raina Gilman, Create Your Own Improv Quilts. A lot of these quilters, it's interesting too, right? Even though they're modern quilters, you can pick out their quilts right away. Especially the next couple that I'm coming up to here, you really can tell their quilts in a quilt show. This one here, she's saying, getting started on your own improv quilts, start simple design. Clear the decks, give yourself room to play, because I said you're going to be working on a design board, or you might have quilts or fabrics, I should say, thrown across your cutting board. You're going to be playing with them. Start with solids, she has here, and select 3 colors and 1 geometric shape to start. In this case, we're talking about rectangles or strips that she's working with, 3 different colors. Okay, and she's got, okay, so you've got a classic rectangle, a skinny rectangle, a fat rectangle. So, you know, even that, you've got one shape, lots of different possibilities. And then what can you do with it? You know, whether you insert it, whether you make them bigger. And as you continue on here, doing more and more things with your little rectangle, you know, you can create some really interesting designs. And then, of course, you're going to start putting them together, right? This is one of her quilts that's you see quite frequently. Here we have two colors now, and I think it's just two colors. It looks like it's just the white and black. And then you'll have leftovers too. That's the other thing. So when you're cutting, you know, you're making these little blocks and trimming them and adding fabric and stuff, what you trim off, you can keep them for another project. So here she's working with these strips again, and you know, this, you know, isn't, but is a Dresden plate, right? You know, I love that, right? Look at all the negative space in that, no border. You know, if you want to say asymmetry, because they're all different, you know, lengths in that. Fun, fun, fun. Here's another little one here, kind of like the little 9 patches each of these are, but again, asymmetry for sure. Infinite edge, right? This one's quilted, the quilting on this one's interesting because there's all different, you probably can't see it very well, but there's all different quilting designs in here. So it's not your typical, you know, straight lines. This is all kinds of, you know, continuous curves and swirls and pebbles and, you know, kind of our traditional quilting design. So you can throw that into a modern quilt if you wanted as well. You'll see a lot of these string type quilts from her. I love, you know, string quilts, but again, they're not, you can see the curvy lines. They are not, uh, you know, all straight, the fabrics when you're putting them together. Here's the one from the cover of the book, Go Fly a Kite. And so, you know, you can see how all these diamonds or kites are all different shapes, different fabrics in them. Something else you'll see her do, and again, you may not be able to see it very well. She's got black and white here. She'll make like a black and white, you know, black and white fabrics, piece them together, make strips, and then throw those into her designs. You certainly got lots of negative space there, no borders. You know, asymmetry, I guess, if you want to say that. It sort of is symmetrical, right? You got one here too, and you know, the outer one, but they're all different sizes, so that kind of changes a bit. You get closer up, you look. These are actually fabric, I was mistaken, but you do see in some of her work, you'll see that she pieces them and uses that fabric. So create your own improv quilts by Raina Gilman. And then we get to this big book. This is the one you'll see. There's lots of quilters doing Irene Roderick's quilts, kind of her look. Improv quilting, dancing with the wall. So she is a big proponent of using the design wall to create her quilts. And yes, she teaches classes, and yeah, I'm seeing a lot of these pop up all over the place. They're instantly recognizable. So here it says here, she talks about color, because that's another thing. A lot of modern quilters are really good at using color because they are really, you know, they need that knowledge so they can work with color in interesting and new ways, some of them, and also contrast. You'll see a lot of differences in value in their quilts for sure. It says here, color, 7 important things when using color. It says it's complicated, it's not tangible. So it's a figment of your imagination, it says here. You can't touch it, but you can feel it. It changes all the time. It's relative to every color it's around. And so you see that, right? Whereas a color of fabric may look dark in one situation, you put it with a fabric that's darker and it looks more like a medium, right? It has value, it's not scary, but it demands respect and close consideration. Now it says here, chartreuse is her favorite color. She calls it Irene green. Puce is a dark brownish red. I can never remember this color. Color has all the fun, but value does all the work. You hear that a lot of the times. So yes, but there's a lot of interesting information in here. Some of her quilts here of what she thinks. Maybe this is like reminds you of houses, dueling pianos. She does here, tree or a lollipop. But she goes through and tells you how she creates things. So she starts, I should say, with, you know, your curves. She's talking about that. She's talking about taking pieces, adding pieces into them, places where you start. So there's a bit of a, in this book, while she's talking about how to put things together, she's also giving you permission or reminders maybe about, you know, just playing with the fabrics, with the colors, with the blocks you come up with. That you don't, you know, you just can use these in different ways. She's giving you different shapes and blocks. You can see the curves here. Everybody's works with curves, just to let you know. Pretty much everybody works with curves, but you don't have to. One of the things she'll say is you don't have to use all these different elements, but you can see how she's working with this and inserting these little strips in here. So different ways of working with these different shapes. So she goes through curves, triangles. She's building a small quilt step by step, which I thought this was really helpful actually, so you can see what she's doing. You can see how many pages there are in this, right? And where she starts here and moves you along and how she makes her decisions as she goes until you get to, and I'm not even sure what the final one is here. I guess maybe here's the little one that she's finally decided on. So you'll add as you go along, you'll discard as you go along. You may even take some of the blocks and change them up a little bit before you put them into a quilt. But this is very interesting. And again, you'll either look at this and think this is really interesting, look at all the things going on in here, or you're going to go and going to say that it's just too much and it's overwhelming for you. And that's totally fine as well, right? She's using a lot of straight lines or simple line. Like there's either just straight lines or curves. Again, simple quilting in most modern quilts. You don't see typically a lot of really elaborate, kind of custom quilting on them. The odd one, but a lot of them are straight line quilting on them. And I have a couple books here from Cindy Grisdella, also recognizable style. Again, an improv quilter. The first one is Artful Improv, and the second one is Adventures in Improv Quilts. It's similar to the first one, but it actually has, kind of challenges to go through. Whereas this is more showing you how to make the different blocks and that. So she talks about, what is improv and gives you an example here. And, she starts out by picking a piece of fabric or two, sewing them together. You don't know what you're going to be doing. You don't know what your final design is, but you continue adding to it. And she goes, that can be both exciting and a little scary. And I think that's the part that people don't know what they're moving towards. And they're not sure if they like what they're doing yet, and I think that can be a little scary for some quilters. But you can go in and again, here's these circles, right? Here's these curves again. So different curves, different shapes of them that she's using there. See all the straight line grid quilting in this particular one. And, this is kind of interesting. It's not a border, but it kind of reminds me of a border. And then again, the negative space going around. And, you could consider the brown a border. Maybe I consider it more like negative space in her situation. But she has lots of information on how to make the improv circles. And that's probably one of the more challenging, perhaps mentally, things to do because you're not using a ruler at all for this, right? And different blocks that you can create. So she's working with different shapes here, curves, rectangles, triangles, and again, she shows you how to make them. So she's using like solid fabrics with a bit of texture in them as well. But yes, she also makes quilts that are very distinctive. I like her quilts actually. And you can see all these different elements coming in here again with the negative space, no borders, asymmetry. So yeah, you're seeing this over and over again, right? In the different quilts. And she has quilting at the back too, which is good, but yeah, so you can see, here's another one of hers too. The Adventures in Improv Quilts, so other look at the type of quilt she creates. A lot of her quilts remind me of, I don't know why, but she has a lot of, skinny lines in them. They remind me of like stained glass almost a lot of the times when I see her quilts. Then we're going to get into something a little different here. So this is a recent book, just came out from C&T. I just did a review on it. And it's called Quilts in Modern Color, Creating Ombre Palettes. And this is by Amber Elliott. And I listened to one of Creative Spark Online's events, I think the last one they had, and they were talking about this type of idea. And it took me a while to wrap my head around this actually, because what we're doing is moving, or what they're doing, I should say. I'm going to find where I didn't mark this one, sorry guys. They're moving color value through a quilt. There's lots of stuff on the color wheel here. We don't need the color wheel. Here we go. So we're talking about different gradients and how they can move through a quilt. And she talks about, for example, if you can see this, you've got the lighter side on the left moving to the darker. You have the lighter on the bottom moving to the top. You've got the darker moving to the light in the center. And so you can see that in, let's see if I can find this first quilt here. I know it's here. Okay. Not sure if there's a better, bigger picture of it. I think that's possibly it. Yeah. So gradient grid quilt. So this is a really easy, not easy, but a simple, if you want to call it that, uh, design or look at how this gradient can move. So you can see we're going lighter at the bottom, darker at the top. Okay. So in each row, it's all the same fabric in each row, but it gets progressively darker as you move up the quilt. Okay. So that's pretty easy to understand, right? I can get that. But as she moves through, we're doing gradients going all over the place. So you can see here, she has these like a diagonal gradient, a radial, which is like a circle, right? So the lighter in the center, but like a circle. So a lot more thinking because you don't have the same fabric colors in there. You're changing fabric colors in the rows, not all of them, but some of them. Or this vertical one as well, where she's coming up. That's what we did in the first one. But she continues on with these things. And then, it's one thing when it's a square, right? When it's just little squares, I can figure that out pretty easily. But when you come into ones like this, where you've got this ombre stars and you've got, darker and it's kind of coming into the center more, it's lighter, but you've got to consider each block. What are the fabrics you're putting into the block? But she moves through, so basically from a simpler way of doing it to a little more complex, if you will. And sometimes they go in more than one direction as well. So that's interesting too. But again, we're going, on this kind of a diagonal gradient in this quilt. So the quilts themselves are very modern looking, right? And then you have to kind of look at them and figure out what is going on in here, right? So again, these darker colors coming into the center where it's lighter. The one thing about these, I mean, you could do it with patterned fabric, but I think it'd be a lot easier to do it with solid fabrics, right? Because, you'd have to do a lot of marking on your fabrics to know what placement, you're going to be doing. And each block could be a little bit different as well. So quite a bit of thinking. I mean, maybe it's just me that has to think about this more. This is kind of fun, but going from the lighter to the darker. And sometimes, like in the first quilt, she has basically the same color that's changing. Whereas here you can see we're going into bit different colors as well. This is kind of fun. This little one here where you've got these lighters here and lighter and moving out to the different colors and darker. So this is an interesting book for, the designs are cool if you like modern quilts, like the projects, but this idea of changing your colors, like shining a light on certain areas of the quilt, if you will, and then it, dissipates as it goes across the quilt is quite interesting. So I found this really interesting, this idea, and how could you use that, even in your traditional quilts. How could you do that? Would be kind of interesting to play with a bit, I think. And then something else I know we were talking about a bit during Energize was going from, well, they are still modern quilts, but these transparency quilts, which I saw a lot of them at QuiltCon, there's a whole section on them. And these are also fascinating to me because, you look at them and a good transparency quilt looks like it's either 3D or, the colors come together and they change and you're going, how did they do that? It's just a different fabric, right? But it's, when you look at them here, for example, and they're overlapped here, this is a different fabric, right? But it doesn't look like that, right? It looks like this whole fabric is overlaid on this darker one, right? So it's just that optical illusion is what you want to create, of course, but it's, it kind of plays with your mind a bit, doesn't it? So you can see here again, like you've got these dark strips going through and they're changing, they look like they change color as they hit those other fabrics, right? Oh, and by the way, sorry, this is Weeks Ringel and Bill Kerr. And it's nice because they show you the fabrics they use in here and they're using pattern fabrics. Now this is an older book too. These guys are kind of I would say one of the originals, certainly of transparency quilts and even modern quilts. Here's that first one I showed you. And when you see it, you know, here again, you have these stage photos. It's hard to see them sometimes, but you can see that shadowing that would be in the quilt when you look at it, right? It's pretty cool. So you can do different things with them, right? I'm trying to see another one in here. Again, I didn't mark these guys, and these are, fairly simple quilts to make. These are nothing super complicated or anything like that. It's hard to see them when they don't have them except for staged, right? So there's another one here with the grays and the blues and that, and you got these pops that are coming across, but again, you've got a change in color where it hits the dark fabric, right? So that's interesting. I think it's interesting, these transparency quilts, but fascinating, right? And I'm thinking you got to do a lot of searching to get exactly the right fabric that you want to use in there. Talking about, not so much the transparency, but the shadows. This is another book I just picked up, Casting Shadows. And so this one's interesting. Another one of Ellen's books here. So, and I look at these and I just find them fascinating to see. And I'm just trying to here's the one here. See how they do this, right? Like some of these you can see these little shadows, and even the 3D, it's like tumbling blocks, right? And you got to pick the right fabrics to get those shadows, correct? The right value of fabric is probably more accurate to say. And what really gets me, I'm trying to find, there's one with a maple leaf or leaves, I should say, or even these drop shadows, right? Where you're doing these again. This is quite interesting because you've got this sky fabric in the background, you've got the block here, but you also have the shadow on all the little circles, right? So yeah, it's just kind of that optical illusion, a lot of fun, I think. Here we go with some of these. They're actually discharging some fabric here to get some of these, but like when you look at this, they look, they look so 3D. They just look like they're floating there. What she's done is she's actually discharged. You can use bleach to discharge the fabric on the background. You can see that's what she's done here. So it's not even another fabric because, it'd be a little, not impossible, but difficult to cut, that irregular a shape with the leaves to get all those little marks. But she just laid them down, discharged them, picks them up, and then she'll applique down those actual fabric leaves. There's a little leaf there. And yeah, it's pretty cool. Sometimes she paints them as well. So, it doesn't always have to be fabric. You can paint them, and she has all this information about how to do that, how she does it, and more stamping. So, this is an interesting book because she talks about different ways she's creating these shadows, not necessarily just with fabric. You can see these here with a little bit of shadow underneath as well. And she may use more than one technique, she was saying, to do them as well. But kind of interesting. I think these are, when you see these in shows, it's kind of like, wow, wow, that's fun. Isn't that cute? And that's really cool. And they're not super hard to do, right? You just have to do a bit of thinking, but they're just really interesting. There's another leaf one there and stuff, but even these ones with the frames, right, that are just a different fabric underneath, it's a different shade. Yeah, interesting. Casting Shadows from Colleen Wise. This is a C&T book too, right? Yeah. So there's that one. If you're looking for, I've got other ones here that are just kind of your normal, like what we've already gone over. Weeks and Bill have another book, Quilts Made Modern. This is not necessarily using the transparency or anything like that, but it's just talking about designing modern quilts. They have lots of information in the beginning of the book here. And then they have their different quilts at the back, or further back in the book, I should say. Here's another. Now this is like a transparency quilt called Transparency. There you go. So, but they're not all, that's not what everything is in this particular book. But again, very simple designs. But I like how they show the different fabrics they're using, and you get to see how they, work, how you can work with patterned fabrics in a modern look. Again, these are fairly simple. This is kind of a fun one, this one with the circles in here. I can get back to the beginning of it. Here we are. Big circles, right? Roundabout and all framed as well. So yeah, that's another book that's an older book, but as I said, they've been around for quite a while, and they're kind of one of the first ones that stepped into, what people considered modern quilts, right? Not necessarily improv. I wouldn't say they don't do improv, but modern quilts playing with value, playing with design, the simplistic design, that type of thing. Not so much negative space. Most of their quilts are more simple. I would say the simple designs that they're going with in different color combinations. Excuse me. So that's a few of the books I have on modern quilts. I do have more, but that kind of gives you a range. It gives you an idea, and you can see how some of those design principles are played out in various quilters. They're all using the same design principles and playing with them. One of the other things about modern quilts too, because I wrote down a few other things myself, is that they also are pushing the boundaries, like flexibility and innovation is another thing that you will see with modern quilts. So, I think they've gone from where, people thought technique didn't matter and they just thought they were kind of throwing anything in to kind of refining what they're doing. And when you look at them, you can get an idea of what the artist was working with, what their inspiration was, where they were going with this quilt. And, I find that there's a lot of layers on them too, from the fabrics and the value to the design to the what kind of embellishments, what kind of quilting did they do on it, or, sometimes it's machine quilted and then they add, some hand quilting in a certain area, sort of thing as an accent. So there's a lot of things that are going on. And I think there's always more, breaking boundaries and trying. Let's just try and see what happens, right? Instead of creating the same thing over and over and over again. And I think, that can be in a lot of different forms. I think they, from the scale of the blocks to different color combinations too. Like I think like most of us, we tend to work with certain colors we like. I think with modern quilters, they will push themselves. But, another thing I'm seeing too is what they call maximalism. That's a trend I'm seeing on social media coming out now. Bigger blocks, more things going on in a block, not quite as simple. So, you've gone from the simple designs to now they're swinging the other way. But like I said, always trying something different. And the other thing I'm seeing too is talking about sustainability is, recycled fabrics, or you even see people adding things in that normally we wouldn't put in a quilt, plastic, Tyvek. So a plasticky kind of, material. So you'll see some of that going on as well. Um, throwing in trims or, selvages, of course, they'll do that as well. Different things, right? Yeah, Tyvek, thanks, Bridget. Yeah, it's gonna take what's so you'll see people using that type of thing, right? Because why not? Let's see what it does. I don't know. And like you got to keep in mind, right? That probably the one things that I don't see people saying a lot, but I think of them a lot, is that when I see modern quilts, I see like a wall quilt. I mean, it's not that they're that small or anything, they can be really big, but they're often, with the work that's gone into them and that, I don't think of them as something I sit and wrap around myself and sit there at night. I mean, you could with some of them for sure, but a lot of them are what I would consider, pieces of art, wall quilts. So certainly if you're throwing in some of these other types of materials, you're not going to wash that, right? So, that's something else that I often think of modern quilts as more like an art piece that I would put on my wall. And that may be just my own thinking, but certainly when you have some of this other stuff going on in there, you're not going to be wrapping yourself around something with Tyvek in it, right? It's interesting. The other thing I'm seeing recently, and not necessarily just modern quilts, although I think if you know Carly Porter, the graffiti quilter, she's just working on something with, I think it's satin. I think it's satin she's working with. And I tripped across somebody else just this week who are using satin in their quilts and, using that in a way that is for a base for their quilting, right? Because the quilting really shows up on that satin, let me tell you. And I think there's certain ways you have to work with that fabric as well in order to get the results that you want. So, pushing the boundaries with different fabrics, different materials, is something else because, it used to always be 100% cotton. I'm seeing a lot of modern quilters going back in and pulling out some of those vintage sheets. They're becoming even more and more popular too. So, whereas we were told never to use poly cottons in our projects, they're throwing anything in. And again, if you look at them as a wall quilt and not a wearable quilt, something that's not going to be washed, um, you can use whatever you want, basically. Why not, right? And that's also, goes into that sustainability. Some of these fabrics that, you know, would be otherwise discarded, they're trying to keep them out of the landfills. So put them in your quilt instead, and then you can admire them. I'm thinking about Fortrell comes to mind. That's a brand name, but oh gosh, here we go again. Crimpline. Oh my God. Crimpline back in the day. whatever crimpling is made of. I'm not exactly sure, but it's not natural. I'll tell you that. And I suspect that stuff never breaks down in a landfill ever. You know, I think you could put that in a quilt and that'll last forever. You know, and there's got to be a lot of crimpling around somewhere still, I'm sure, probably in my mom's closet. But anyway, because I remember things being made of that didn't, you know, lasted forever, doesn't wrinkle, like just, you know, it's some unnatural fabric, I'm sure. But anyway, you know, why not try and use some of that in your quilts? It's almost harkening back to crazy quilt trend, right? Hundreds of years ago or 100 years ago, whatever that was, you know, where they had velvets and, you know, satin type fabrics, all that different chintz in their crazy quilts. Same kind of idea, you know, whatever happened years ago, you know, everything eventually comes around again, doesn't it? So, okay, so that's my spiel on modern quilts. I hope some of that was helpful for you. If you go to my YouTube channel and you look under the book reviews playlist, because I have a playlist, you're going to see a lot of those books in there. I hope you enjoyed learning about modern quilting. And if you're wondering about one of my favorite books on modern quilting, don't worry, I got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information that you need. And for more helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.